to the Minnesota WIC Participant-Centered Webinar Series. My name's Karen. I'll be facilitating the webinar today. And my colleague Marcus, he'll be doing the behind-the-scenes work of monitoring the phone lines and just making sure that things go smoothly. So during this webinar series, we've been sharing ideas and best practices for providing participant-centered WIC services. And a few of these webinars, including today's, have been targeted to staff in leadership roles within the WIC program, coordinators, supervisors, and mentors. The topic for today is using participant and staff feedback, a very important topic for WIC leaders. So today we'll talk about why to ask for feedback from these groups. We'll talk about participants first, tools to collect feedback, topics to learn about, how to use the feedback you collect. Then we'll talk about staff separately, about collecting and using feedback from staff and ways to do that. So we'll get started. First, we'll talk about some arguments for collecting feedback from participants and staff. First, it's part of being participant-centered, or if you want to think about it, staff-centered. You're paying attention to your external and your internal clients, what they want and need. And that will help you to make program improvements. Feedback can help provide actionable steps for you to create to make a better customer service experience for participants and a better experience for staff on a day-to-day basis. It can help you respond to changes in your community, changes in your workforce, or in the population in general. There's been a lot of changes in the past years around how much nutrition information is out there and accessible to participants. The information itself has changed. Best practices and recommendations around nutrition and infant feeding and breastfeeding are different. They've changed over the years. And also think about the way that people receive information or like to receive information. How fast technology is changing. And our demographic, heavily young parents, how they're accessing that information. Collecting feedback can help us identify and address barriers to participation. At WIC, we know we have a retention issue, especially after that age 1 threshold. And feedback can help us with this. It lets you know what's working in our program, what's not working, are there barriers that we need to address. It can tell us about how we're treating people and how people feel treated by us. Do they feel comfortable and respected? Do they feel angry and disrespected? Another argument for the process of asking others for input and feedback is just the act of asking people makes them feel heard and included. Whether it's staff or participants, it encourages the feeling and that belief of inclusion. They care. The agency cares what I think, and I have a voice in shaping the WIC program. And this allows you to find your advocates and use them. You could nurture those positive people, and they do your marketing for you. They recommend WIC to friends and colleagues. They'll spread the word. You can even get quotes or testimonials to use in your marketing. That's another aspect for collecting feedback. It's really interesting to me, but despite technology, all the TV commercials, and all that other stuff, when asked, how did you hear about the WIC program, one of the biggest ways is still through family, friends, or someone who's been on WIC before. That's how they find out about WIC. So listening to participants is really a way to create a service that makes a difference in people's lives. And listening to staff is a way to create a working environment that stimulates what we want, engagement, enthusiasm, and active participation in that vision we're creating. One reason why many agencies or companies don't collect feedback is that it can be not so fun sometimes. People think it's an invitation to complain, to gripe, and in many cases, it is. We might not ask because we fear the answers will be negative, Or another reason, sometimes a bigger one, is we fear we won't be able to make any changes anyway or solve the issues, so why even ask the question? But it doesn't really help to work from fear. Bill Gates said, your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. So coming at it from that positive viewpoint, that complaints are a good thing. The negatives, they give you insight. And the feedback channels, they give people an outlet to voice their frustrations and concerns, which helps them as well. So you want to get input from customers and also from frontline staff around their views of customers' thoughts. They're often the one that deal with those unhappy customers the most, and they'll have some insight into the most common issues. And they might have an angle or something that will help the situation that maybe you haven't thought of. So that inside frontline perspective can really help. Some states and some agencies have started to survey and collect feedback from participants who've left the WIC program, and although they're still eligible, to find out why. Why are people leaving? Alterum's worked with several states to do this, and I know at least one agency in Minnesota has conducted focus groups to get at that population. I talked to a state recently who was in a real rural location, and they talked to their dropouts, or the people who left WIC while still eligible, and they found that for them, lack of transportation was one of the biggest barriers to participation. People just couldn't get there. And so now that program does up to 25% of their WIC appointments over the phone, which I've never seen before. And they do have EBT, which helps them. But they made that change as a result of learning from and hearing from their participants. One interesting point to note about unhappy customers, though, is that the majority of them don't complain. I read a few different studies that had some different findings, but the bottom line was most of unhappy customers don't complain. They simply won't come back, or they'll continue to come, but they'll be unhappy. They'll feel that no one really cares about their input. That it won't make a difference. So most companies don't hear from those unhappy customers unless they ask them, unless they actively, they're soliciting and using that feedback. And this is the same with staff too. Most don't complain. Or maybe they'll complain to peers and not to management. They won't share their ideas about ways to make things better. I do a lot of interviews with staff as part of my state assessments. And I'll often find a real disconnect, a miscommunication. Staff think one way, but management assumes they think another way. And it's often about collectible stuff, I find. As an example, one agency I assessed last year, I first interviewed the manager, and I was asking her about inter-office communication, and she told me that they don't have many staff meetings anymore. Other things come up, and staff don't really need them anymore, she said, because they can talk to the supervisor who goes around to the satellite sites, checks in with people regularly, and then she could fill them in about any new policies or procedures that are going on. So then I went off to talk to the staff, and every interview that I did was similar at the satellite sites. When it came to the topic of inter-office communication, they said they hated the lack of staff meetings. They felt communication was extremely lacking and that they don't find out about policies and information in a timely manner. They saw it as they weren't being respected. There was real anger there and resentment, and that came through in the interview. So one thing is that the manager didn't have the accurate information because she made an assumption and she didn't ask. And two, that there was a fix for this. Maybe not a simple one because schedules would have to be managed, but a regularly scheduled monthly meeting or even a every other month meeting would have really improved that working environment a lot. So feedback from staff and participants has and will continue to influence program changes in WIC. So how we provide services, nutrition education, the food choices we offer with WIC. And as part of my job, I do focus groups with WIC participants in states, different parts of the country. And when you hear something once, fine, but when you hear it over and over in different states, in different settings, in urban, in rural settings, in big programs, in small programs, then you know it's something to take seriously. And so there's a few main messages that I keep hearing over and over the past few years in focus groups. When people talk about why they're unhappy or what they'd like to see in their WIC programs. And these are just a couple of the messages that I think are important. One is that people think we focus too much on weight or being in a certain place on the growth chart. I hear they called my child fat, or they said I wasn't feeding them enough, or they're obsessed with weight. So obviously, our assessment process, our education process around the growth curves, BMI, body weight, it's not doing what we intended to do with a lot of people. So there's something there. Tailoring the conversation, I hear a lot, I want to be treated as an individual. My child isn't like the other children. She's special. Don't treat her like she is like the others. Don't just give me the same advice you give everybody. And so some of these things, you'll notice, these are the things that you all in Minnesota have been working on with your participant-centered services. Another thing is options. People want options for how they get their nutrition education. They say, we want a choice. One person might want an internet class, whereas another one might want a one-on-one session with a nutritionist, or someone else might want a group class. But that choice is something I hear a lot about. Also, that staff skills or the communication style we use with participants, that it impacts their thoughts about us. It impacts services. It makes a difference. I like this one woman because she listens to me and she lets me ask my questions. But this one, she's mean to me and she rushes me through. So I don't like her. So what we're doing really makes a difference. So participants' voices are and they'll continue to shape the WIC program at a national level, state level, and a local level. And my biggest takeaway from focus groups and interviews, though, still, is that people love to be asked. At the end of focus groups, every focus group, they always say, I want to do this again. I wish my program did this on a regular basis. I want to be asked these questions. So the fact is, people feel special and included when you ask for their input. So first we'll talk about collecting information from participants and then from WIC staff. So before this webinar, we did a survey asking you about how you collect and use the feedback from participants, and there was a wide range of responses. From those who said they collected on a regular, consistent basis, whether it's annually, biannually, quarterly, and some of you said that you have no formal system for collecting feedback from participants, but that when it's offered by a client at the point of service. Some of you said that you collect feedback in multiple ways on different topics or aspects of WIC as needed. And a couple of people said they want to start or were thinking about initiating a system to collect more formal feedback. Here were some examples of the types of feedback collected from participants. So feedback on hours of operation, convenience of the location, appointment reminders, phone services, customer service, shopping experience, barriers, program suggestions, nutrition topics, the type of education style, the impact of behavior change, a tough thing to measure, effectiveness of services, breastfeeding perceptions, food security. So lots of different aspects of WIC that we can collect feedback on. There are many different ways to collect feedback from participants. From the survey we conducted, surveys were the most popular response that you all listed. And surveys can be administered in many ways: paper, electronic, over the phone. Another way to collect information is participant interviews. You can collect the information directly. And focus groups is another way to collect information, bringing together a group of people to ask about their perceptions, opinions, beliefs, or their attitudes about WIC or a specific aspect about WIC. Maybe it's shopping or nutrition education or customer service that they get. And this allows you to really get a rich, detailed, qualitative data. The thing with focus groups, you do need someone who's trained in facilitating and summarizing focus group feedback. And we'll talk a little bit more about the pros and cons of some of these options. But less formal would be listening sessions or a town hall type thing, maybe getting a small group or a larger group together where they're invited to share ideas, concerns, suggestions with the agency staff. You'd have to think about how to recruit participants to take part to get that balanced participant perspective. There's different sorts of feedback forms. People might give their feedback on a particular event or a group or a class. There's suggestion boxes or feedback boxes. They're designed to collect feedback on any issue, small or large, that someone has. And you want to make these as easy as possible to do. It could be a real box that, and people put paper in a box, or it could be done electronically, maybe a tablet at the front desk at the checkout. You could design a little form to use with the feedback box, or maybe a little blank piece of paper, but thinking about making it easy. Or maybe it's a combination of these things to collect feedback. You could mail out a simple survey, and then at the end maybe ask people if they'd be willing to share more information over a phone. Ask for their contact information and do a little interview to collect more details and deeper questions to get more customer feedback. So some different options. I want to talk a little bit more about a couple of these things. So there's a reason why the survey is often a great tool and one that is frequently used. For one, that they're easy and people are used to taking surveys. They're quick most of the time. They're fairly easy to analyze, especially if you use an electronic survey. You can think about using a mix of open and closed-ended questions, and I think a good survey, most of the time you should have both. And there's so many ways to administer surveys. You could do a paper survey in the WIC program at the time of service. You could mail out a paper survey, and we've had very good success response rates to our mail surveys, more than we expect sometimes. You could use electronics. Sites have used tablets, quick, easy ways for a person to take a short survey at the end of the visit. Surveys could also be emailed out. And now text surveys are becoming more and more popular that you can do right on your phone. And then there's phone surveys. Some states have used this call-out systems to survey participants for customer service and get their feedback. And there's companies that specialize this. And they do it in a way that most review boards find doesn't violate confidentiality. They have just the phone number, and they use this computer-assisted telephone interviewing system. And so they collect data that way. And then some other agencies have worked with universities and other outside entities, but the phone is another mechanism for survey. The drawback of the survey is that you can't get too much detail or description usually. You can't have too many open-ended questions on a survey, or the person will get survey fatigue. And we'll talk about that more in a minute too, but that can affect the quality of the information that you do get. So some sources of questions for surveys. One is each other. Many of you have done surveys with participants, and you have questions and tools that you've used. You can share the tools you've used, or you can ask your state contact to share tools from other agencies with you. WICWorks is another source of questions. WICWorks has several participant surveys from other states, and you can take questions from that. Here are some tips for surveys or feedback forms to think about. One is to watch the length. If it's too long, people get survey fatigue, where they start rushing through to get done. and then you start getting less reliable data. Now, if I had one big annual participant satisfaction survey and I wanted to cover several areas, I'd probably go longer, but thinking about keeping the shorter surveys around 5 to 10 questions. And so when you're designing a study, you really want to think about the focus or the purpose of the study. How are you going to use the information that you do collect, and thinking it through to the end, and then only asking the questions that you really need to ask. Don't throw in extra questions because, oh, that would be nice to know, or that couldn't hurt to ask, because in the end, you're hurting the data that you do get because of the survey fatigue. And when possible, explaining the purpose. Tell people why you're asking the questions that you are. Participants might think you're asking questions to determine something about eligibility or to judge them somehow. Staff, too, might have issues and not know why you're asking, so it's important to clearly tell them why you're collecting the information to improve the program, whatever the focus is. And this will reduce any anxiety and help people answer truthfully, because that's what you want. You want to think about the number of open-ended questions. They're wonderful, wonderful, but they really add to the length of the survey, how long it takes someone to complete it. So thinking just about 2 or 3 open-ended questions is usually the max. On your closed-ended questions, it really helps to use rating scales to help you. It keeps it simple, and it also lets you track changes over time with rating scales too. So thinking about a rating scale from maybe agree strongly to disagree strongly, or from 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst and 10 being the best. Notification. So this isn't always possible, but can you notify them if they'll be receiving a survey? Say they're going to get a text survey after their visit about customer service. If you tell them in advance, they'll be more likely to complete it and you'll get a better response rate. You want to think about language, how many primary languages you have at your program. If you only have 1 or 2 primary languages, it's easier. I remember when I was working in Boston, my site had 4 major languages, which was real challenging to work with, because you want to balance translation costs. That's another factor you need to think about. So maybe you decide to only have it in 2 major languages if that's going to capture the bulk of your participants. That's something to think about. Incentives improve completion rates. They're not entirely necessary, but they do help. Incentives for focus groups, usually bigger, but for surveys, even a small little incentive really helps. It could be as little as a $5 gift card. Or being entered into a raffle really seems effective too. We did a mail survey where if they completed the survey, they'd be entered into a raffle for a $100 gift card, and that seemed to work really well. So little things matter when you're thinking about an incentive. Sometimes just having food at a focus group, that impacts people. It impacts participants, what they think about the focus group, and how they participate in it. If it's a big survey, it's good to test your questions on a subset of the population. Ask the questions, see if people understand them, see how they interpret them. Or you could use questions that have been tested or validated by someone else. That's another good option. Just a couple of mistakes to avoid with surveys. These are a couple that I've made. First is, this is one I did on a survey 2 years ago. So I had several areas of WIC services, and so I asked, how would you rate this program in each of these following areas? Would you say it's excellent, very good, good, fair, or poor? Well, what I didn't think about here is balance. You see, I have 3 positive responses, excellent, very good, good. And then I have 2 negative ones, fair and poor. So that, I didn't realize until I got it back, but it skewed my data to the positive side. What would have been better is if I had 2 negatives, 2 positives, and a neutral. Another thing to think about is your questions and asking only 1 question at a time. You want to read your question, make sure it really has only 1 topic. So this question, how was the class? Was the instructor knowledgeable? What could they have done differently? Too many things for people to answer. So you want to watch for simplicity, simple sentences, simple words. Look for double negatives in a question that really confuses people. So I'd like to do a poll question now and ask which type of survey question do you think might work best with participants around customer service that they get from WIC, engaging that. So, and after each question you might have follow-up questions. I want you to look at this rating scale. This is a smiley face rating scale because I'm going to use it in one of the questions and I wasn't able to put it into the poll. So I'll read them and then we can vote. So one of the questions is, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst customer service possible and 10 being the best customer service possible, how would you rate this WIC office on customer service? And then you could circle an answer and follow up with, what are some of the reasons why you chose that number? And I realize my rating scale is a little off there. But that should go from 1 to 10. And then on the second question could be, overall, how satisfied were you with the way you were treated during your visit to WIC today? And then you could have that smiley face range. And then you could ask, how could we improve the services you receive from WIC? And this might be good with people who, say, don't speak the language. Or another question could be, please rate your level of agreement with this statement. At WIC, I'm always treated with courtesy and respect. Do you strongly disagree with that statement? Disagree, neither agree or disagree, agree or strongly agree. And you could, as a possibility, ask those people that chose strongly disagree or disagree what suggestions they have. So go ahead and vote now which you think would be most effective. And I'll give you a minute to vote. Okay, the votes are coming in. Okay, it looks like one's pulling ahead, so I will see them, broadcast them so you can see them coming in. It looks like that middle one, using that range of smiley faces, was the winner here. So, and there's more and more tools, electronic tools are using that smiley face rating too to really help people. And it might be good for our population to try something like that because of the language barrier. It might help people. I'm going to go back to sharing. So nowadays, they have a lot of electronic survey tools out there. There's a lot. I've listed a few here, but there are many more. And many of these are free for the basic program or for a certain number of surveys, and then you pay for more features or more surveys. And if you have one you particularly use or like, feel free to put it in that chat box for people too. I've used and liked the first two, SurveyMonkey and SurveyGizmo, as different tools. So surveys can capture information on many aspects of WIC. You could ask about customer service. You could ask about shopping. If you initiate a new program or a new source of education, you can ask about that. I want to give you one example of a tool that's designed to look at PCS communication skills. So that's a kind of tough area. It's an amorphous thing to gauge. And this is from a CARES tool that was designed for motivational interviewing. And we've adapted it to be used with WIC. So it looks at different aspects of participant-centered communication style. So after the appointment, you could ask a certain number of participants to complete this survey to get a sample, maybe see if there's any areas where you need to work on. So you could ask, how did the WIC staff do at making you feel at ease? And you'll notice each one of these has a little description under each, so being friendly and warm and respectful, or letting you tell your story, really listening, being interested in you as a whole person, fully understanding your concerns, showing care and compassion. And there's 10 of these. Being positive, explaining things clearly, helping you take control, making a plan of action with you. So maybe your group decides you want to do something like this to survey participant-centered services, but you think maybe this is too many questions. So maybe as a group you decide, what are the variables you want to look at? What are the 5 to 7 things that really capture for you the essence of PCS? For example, I would, if I was doing it, I definitely want to include that number 10, that making a plan. I think that's a really important part of PCS for me, so I'd want to include that. Just an option for you to think about. You could do interviews with participants. That's another way to get information. As part of our assessments, we do exit interviews with a subset of participants. Usually we take 20 to 35 participants after their WIC appointment and do an interview. And they're really good to collect more detailed information because you can ask follow-up questions, which is difficult with a survey. But interviews are time-consuming. That's a drawback. Your sample size is smaller. It might not be representative of your entire population. If you don't speak the language, you'll need to find someone who can translate, so that could be an issue as well. Also, ideally, you don't want someone from the WIC program or from the front line to do it because they bias the answers or the responses. So I just want to give you one example because interviews don't have to be just question, answer, question, answer, question, answer. This is one tool we use with participants, and it's based on a nutrition tool that some of you might have tried, that card sort. So we have 8 to 10 aspects of WIC service. And what we do is we ask people to sort them into 3 piles. And the 3 piles are labeled always a problem, sometimes a problem, or never a problem. And they sort them into their piles. And then we ask for more detail about those problem areas. What are the issues there? When does that happen? What could help with that? And you can also ask for more detail about the never a problem column because that's where you learn about your strengths to build on what's going really well. But I spend the bulk of my time talking about those few problem areas that people identify. And for interviews also, a little incentive helps, but it's not necessary. Focus groups and listening sessions, these are wonderful. This is what gets you your rich, detailed, qualitative data. This is where you hear stories. And when you combine something like focus groups with survey data on a larger population, what you get is really powerful. The cons of focus groups is you really want someone trained in doing focus groups, someone who's trained to deal with focus groups issues like conversation dominators and things like that. And when possible, you don't want someone associated with WIC or someone who does direct service to conduct the focus groups because they'll be recognized and they'll bias the responses. So focus groups can be pricey as a result because you have to hire someone usually if there's not someone within your agency that has that capacity. Focus groups are small, so you can't extrapolate and talk about the implications for the larger population with certainty. That's where the survey data usually comes in. But they give you that rich qualitative data and really let you hear opinions and stories. If you were interested in learning more about doing focus groups, there was a local agency in the spotlight in Minnesota a while back. And I believe it was the Scott Carver WIC program that conducted focus groups with participants of children who used to be on the WIC program and might still be eligible but no longer come to WIC. So they're looking at that group that are no longer coming and finding out why. And the result of the focus groups, they made some changes in their agency, and one was moving to a flexible appointment schedule. So I believe if you're interested, you can contact Jackie Lara, I think it is the person to contact to learn more about that. So after you have the data, how do you use it? It's not worth it if you don't use the data that you're collecting. There's no point in it. And you can't act on every piece of feedback you receive from participants. You wouldn't have the resources. And you might not want to anyway because 1 or 2 customers might want something that's not in the best interest of everybody or the rest of the participants. So what you're looking for when you're using feedback data is trends. Do a group of people feel a certain way? Here's a sample from your responses around how you use the feedback collected from participants. Look for areas of opportunities to change to meet customer needs from open-ended comments. Discuss with staff at staff meetings. Share with the staff or the team what's going well, what's not. Brainstorm what can be changed. Compare information collected from previous surveys. Identify trends. Share the results with state staff. Individually in peer reviews and training and in reports given to MDH and in quotes for program brochures. Program changes or reinforcement that we're meeting the needs of clients to determine outcomes. So many different uses for the data, from program improvements to training to a reinforcement that we're doing a good job to getting marketing quotes and things for the brochure. So a lot of different uses for feedback. I want to talk a little bit about staff feedback, collecting and using it, and why. One reason for collecting staff feedback is that your employees have different perspectives. They can often see areas that need to be improved and might have ideas on how to improve them. And asking for their input leads to that feeling of engagement from them. Asking them what they think and then acting on that advice makes them partners with the management in determining the direction of the WIC program. So asking for feedback will help reduce turnover and training costs and let you identify what's wrong before it's a major issue, where the issues are. If you could be a mind reader, you wouldn't have to ask. You could have the higher retention rates, lower absentee rates, have better customer service and morale, but we aren't mind readers, so we do have to ask staff. And when I go in and interview staff, most of the time I see trends, I hear trends. Not always, but most of the time. The majority of the staff is disgruntled about something, or the majority of staff really feels engaged and included, and I find out why. But what I often hear, and I said this before, is that what staff feel are issues might be different from what management sees as issues and what they think staff feel. From the survey, here are some areas where collecting feedback might be valuable. Training needs, items to be included in staff meetings, process or overall quality improvement, what works, what doesn't, change suggestions, information on appointment times, documentation, policy needs, feedback on how meetings are run, challenges with nutrition education, breastfeeding, PCS services, individual situations. Just like with participants, there's so many ways to collect feedback from staff. You could collect it verbally, whether it's individually and in a group. And the most popular response from the survey that we did from you all was collecting verbal feedback from staff at a meeting. You could do surveys with staff, paper or electronic, maybe an emailed survey. Surveys can be formal or informal. Maybe you have a bigger formal yearly employee feedback survey that covers multiple areas, but a smaller informal surveys on other topics as they're needed. To get more honest answers, you'll want to do an anonymous survey if you can. Many of you said that you use an open door policy for staff feedback and staff feel comfortable. And the thing to think about here is it a real open door? Because that can be tough sometimes. It will take effort not to be defensive when you hear things that maybe you don't like or maybe that you disagree with. So it's important to affirm employees that do come and do step up to offer that insight or those suggestions. Some programs have staff focus groups or listening sessions for staff. If your program uses peer mentors, you could use them as a proxy. They might have insight into their peers. Maybe yearly you bring all the mentors together and ask for their feedback. What are people frustrated about? Where do they want more training? What things need to be different within the agency? Or maybe you're asking your supervisors if you have a large agency with many sites. So we're not looking for names in particular, just general feedback. What's working, what's not, what's needed. Here are a few examples from the survey around how staff feedback is generally used. ask for feedback at staff meetings, have an envelope for suggestions or topics for staff meetings, open door for staff to talk individually. Participatory unit meeting where areas of concern are discussed and solutions are identified, along with formal quality improvement projects. We discuss many things at our monthly WIC meetings, and if all in agreement to include something in our practice, we attempt to do so. Here are some types of information collected or areas to think about when you're collecting information from staff. Program ideas, agency improvement ideas. Ask about management. This can be tough to do, but we don't know what to work on if we don't ask. My organization doesn't do a formal 360-degree review process, but what they do is they put 4 or 5 questions on our yearly employee service about our direct supervisor, and I think that's really important. Working environment, areas of strengths and interests. Can I help them do more things in those areas where they are interested? You won't know until you ask. Areas where training's needed. Can I ask about their confidence level for individual skills, see where they need more training? You could ask staff about the feedback they get from participants. Ask about the casual feedback that they get all the time. Some tips for surveys in getting feedback from staff. We said anonymity helps people be honest. You want to advertise in advance, if possible, with a staff survey. Let people know it's coming. You want to give enough time for them to complete it, or you'll get rushed or bad answers, but don't give them too long either, or they'll forget about the survey. With staff surveys, I usually do about 2 weeks, sometimes 3. That's what I find is the sweet spot. You want to try not doing it during a crazy busy time, though. Say it's your year-end close. Don't do it then. Do it during a quieter time. You want to think about including everyone. If a question doesn't pertain to people, you can ask them to skip it. Electronically, this is much easier because you can do skip patterns in your surveys. Because maybe there's certain questions you want to ask of the nutrition staff only, or breastfeeding peer counselors only, or clerical staff. But some questions you want to ask everybody. Often big open-ended questions can be intimidating or vague for people. They struggle with it. So what I find work for open-ended questions is to do a contextual follow-up question. So you might start with a rated question. Say it's a scale of 0 to 10, how happy are you at work? And they answer. And then I think about asking a follow-up open-ended question like, is there anything we can do to make you happier at work? And this context makes it easier for people to respond. So if you're doing an electronic survey, you could decide, do I want to ask everybody that follow-up question after? Or maybe I only want to ask the people who gave a poor rating. And that comes up for those people but doesn't come up for the rest. So there are different options. Again, you want to focus on the length of the question. No survey for staff, I think, should really take longer than about 15 minutes, maybe 20, or you'll really start to reduce your response rate, and you'll run into that survey fatigue. And think about the number of surveys that they answer in a year, too. Let them know that surveys will be acted on. If an employee believes their input matters, they will participate in the survey. They know that all concerns can't be addressed, but as we said, just asking helps foster those good relations. Everybody wants to be heard, to have a voice. I'd like to do another poll question. I'm going to read you a series of questions, and which question do you think would be the most valuable to use with staff if the goal was to have an open-ended question that would improve the day-to-day life of an employee? So I'll read the questions and then we can vote. So which of these questions do you think would get the best response? What could your agency do to help you grow in your career? Or how do you think the relationships between you and your coworkers could be improved? What do you think your agency could do to improve your happiness at work? What's one thing you would like to see improved within our organization? How can we help you be more successful? If you were in management, what would you change tomorrow? So go ahead and vote now for your favorite. And I'll give you a minute to do that. And the votes are coming in. Okay, the votes are coming in. Something interesting is going on, so I'll broadcast so you can see it happening. There's a lot of different responses here for different types of questions. So several of these could be good questions to ask. It looks like the one that has the most votes is, if you were in management, what would you change tomorrow? I like that question. I haven't used it before. I think I'll add that to my next survey and see what responses I get. Another popular one was, what's one thing you would like to see improved within our organization? So different questions. I'll go back to sharing. Many of you might have attended that leadership workshop that the state offered last summer. And during that workshop, we talked a lot about employee engagement. And in particular, we talked about this Gallup poll that's done yearly to measure employee engagement. It's done with thousands of employees across the country and the world in different professions. And there are 12 rating questions that they use as part of the survey. So they ask you to rate your level of agreement with the following statement. I know what's expected of me at work. I have the materials and equipment I need to do my work right. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. In the last 7 days, I have received recognition or praise for doing good work. My supervisor or someone at work seems to care about me as a person. There's someone at work who encourages my development. At work, my opinions seem to count. The mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important. My associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. I have a best friend at work. Someone at work has talked to me about my progress. This last year, I've had opportunities to work, to learn, and grow. So at Alterum, we've taken many of these questions and included them in our assessment survey because they've been tested and validated. And they help staff identify areas where strengths and challenges are within an agency. So I put this in here as an example. I forgot to include it in your slides, so I will send it out when I send you the post survey. So when we're thinking about cultivating an engaged, motivated staff, these are some areas to think about. Here are some responses from the survey around using feedback from staff. Sometimes use it to make changes, sometimes listen and evaluate what needs to be done. To try and make things easier for staff, more consistent charting. We do reflective practice with CPAs for an hour a month to discuss challenging situations, PCS with clients, suggest alternative ideas, and do training. I believe we'd use it to formulate a standard of care within our agency, as well as offer some options in regard to how to handle different scenarios. So when you do use staff feedback, and it does come from a feedback mechanism, you want to let them know that it's a result of their impact, their input. So by demonstrating that employees can have a tangible impact on the workplace, their feedback, you're encouraging participation in future surveys. To formulate approaches to services is another way to use that feedback. Can you have feedback overload? And the answer is yes. Feedback should be used to improve services, but it shouldn't be a barrier to services itself. I'll give you an example from my work. I was working with this agency in another state, and they were doing a time study on every chart that they did. And this is back when they had paper charts. I think they had a paper chart and there was a combination of a computer and they had a piece of paper as well. And the time studies should be designed to help productivity. It's how you find your bottlenecks, how you find your issues in flow, and they're really valuable in a short-term study to identify issues. But in this case, the time study itself was adding minutes onto every visit. It was adding to the process. And they couldn't possibly analyze and use all that data anyway, and they weren't, as it turned out. So that's a case where it was taken too far. I think one lesson that we've learned from this PCS webinar series was that there was a burden on you all as attendees for all the surveys that we put out. There was a pre-survey and a post-survey for each. That's a lot of surveys. And they were short, and that helps when it's quick. And we really felt we needed to do that pre-survey because that's where the content for the webinar came from, that idea sharing. And we also wanted people's responses after. We wanted to know what people liked, what they worked, what topics they wanted to hear about. It allowed us to make changes throughout the process, but it was a lot of surveys. So sometimes you do have to think and make some hard choices to find that balance between too much and too little and find that just right for surveys. So we've covered a lot about concepts and ideas around collecting and using feedback from participants and staff. I'd like to take a pause here just for a minute to see if anyone wants to come off mute and share an idea or a strategy. You can also type in the chat box, but I will give you a moment. I'll pause here. If anyone wants to come off mute, do so. Okay, well, I will leave that chat box open for a couple of minutes after the webinar if anyone wants to share anything else. And we are just about out of time, so I will say thank you for sharing all the great ideas around collecting feedback. Sharing your ideas as leaders and managers helps everyone. And if you're a program, and it sounds like there's several of you that are doing a lot around collecting feedback from participants, and you have the knowledge and the resources, consider putting yourself out there as a point of contact for other people to call if they have questions. And that will help everybody develop. So thank you all for joining us today, and goodbye.